Good evening. Welcome to the Easter special stream. The Easter special is going to be about troubleshooting. We're going to try and categorize different problems you can have when riding or when preparing to ride, different trouble your horse can have. And we are going to try and solve some problems for you, or at least not solve them perhaps. That's a bit rich, even for me. But we're going to at least try and give you some good ideas for some problems. So if you're one of those who are looking for help for your own horse and your own riding right now, prepare your questions and we'll take a few questions as we go on in this stream. The first thing we want to say today for troubleshooting we find is important, and everybody else should find it important as well. It's a disclaimer that says consult your veterinarian, is that the word? Mm-hmm. Veterinarian, or consult your physician. There might be trouble that will become worse no matter what you do training wise, so you have to consult these first, unless you're pretty sure that's not the problem. That's all up to you, obviously, but consult your physician or your veterinarian or both if you want to become better at this, or you want to solve difficult issues that your horse or you might have. As well, in that, you could consult any physical therapist or chiropractor or whatever, but the first two, as I already stated 3 times, physician, veterinarian. Right, we will move on to what categories of injuries we tend to try and solve and which we tend to see more often, or whatever you want to call it. We split those into 2 first. Acute injuries and chronic pain, injury, trouble, whatever you want to call it. The acute ones might become chronic, obviously, and chronic injuries might become acute too, so there's a bit of a crossover there, but we're going to try and treat them differently nonetheless. When we come to the acute injuries, it might be, things that happen in the paddocks, things that happen when you're in the forest doing your funny things. It might be all sorts of injuries that happen. It might be ligaments or bones that break or any really difficult things like that. That might be acute injuries. Other things might be just cuts, bruises, all sorts of things like that. And many of those will not be affected by how you train. Some of those will definitely affect how you train, or if you should train at all, consult your veterinarian or your physician, depending on whether your horse or you fell worst. And take it from that point. Ask them first. Chronic injuries are quite often more difficult to deal with. Sometimes your veterinarian or your physician might even tell you that there's nothing to be done about this. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it can still be solved. And we will try and get into all of those different ways of solving that kind of issues as well as we can during this, fairly short stream. Might be a few minutes over today, I don't know yet. Depends on you guys. Please find some questions for me. I'm going to have to look back in my notes today to be sure and find my right things.
I can add one thing.
Yes, please.
You were talking about, when your veterinarian is sort of has checked out your horse, and now perhaps things have healed, mm-hmm. and the vet says, now you're allowed to train, but you must train really well. Mm-hmm. And perhaps that is when we can come in and say, this is a good way to train when the horse has a problem.
Yeah.
So we're sort of helping you from the veterinarian. And
when you've been released by the veterinarian.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
then we can show you how to change the movement or change the training so that you don't fall back into the chronicle thing.
Yep. Okay, so we're going to treat this like this. The acute injuries stay over there with the vets, because the vet will release you when you're allowed to train for that. And the chronicle injuries, we're going to leave them to what we are trying to do. And the first issues we need to handle is what is a chronicle injury, or a pain or problem. Sometimes it's just a problem. And how can we solve these? What is the required way to change this up? Because this chronicle thing, let us say your horse limps on one leg, or your horse can only canter one way, and it is because some chronicle thingy has happened to the other side that makes it difficult. All of these different chronicle injuries or chronicle pains have been created by we don't know what. Quite often we won't know what the reasoning is behind this. It might be because at one time your leg didn't work, and that created a downward spiral, and now your horse does this. Quite other times it might be that your horse is not straight, and you have not got the skill to make the horse straight, but you ride the horse pretty hard because of whatever needs or wants you have, and then that unequal-sidedness of the horse, crookedness, I think is the word, that's much better. Unequal-sidedness, that's the new way to say crookedness. No, it's not. Will create then problems that become chronicle over time. This can happen because the spine is loaded differently from one side than the other. Or it can happen because one knee doesn't bend at the right time when the horse puts his legs down. Or it might be that the horse always lands the same way when it's jumping. Maybe it always lands this way. Or it might be one out of 100,000 million other ideas that have created a chronicle problem or chronicle issue, chronicle pain, chronicle injury. And we have to try and find some way to solve it. And in order to find a way to solve it, we first have to understand what's happened. And we are going to sum it up really, in a very short way and say, what's happened is that some tissues have been loaded too much for their level of preparedness. That is what has happened. Doesn't much matter what the level of your training, what sport you're pursuing, it doesn't really matter. What has happened is that some tissue has been loaded harder than its level of preparedness. And this level of preparedness is kind of hard to put your head around, because it might be all sorts of different things. I will take a quick example from the way humans do things. We'll take a squat, and we'll take just a very short squat. We have two different ways of squatting that I'm going to show now. There's as many as you would like. One is like this, and one is like this. They're a little bit different. I'm going to do it again. This one tends to load the knee and the tissues on the front of your thigh more. Also, it tends to load the ankle more. This one tends to load your hips and your spine more. I'm not saying one is better, one is worse. I'm saying they load the body differently. And this is a key point of what we're going to talk about all night. If we know, and we have just shown, that some tissues are more loaded in one way of moving, and some other tissues more loaded in another way of moving, then we also know that if we change it from one to the other, we will either get an injury instantly because those other tissues aren't prepared, Or we can solve the problem by taking the force from one, in this case the knees, to another area, in this case the hips, right? It's no worse than that. That's the idea we are trying to wrap our heads around tonight. So if you have a problem, you have to find what is your specific problem. For instance, we quite often ask, so what's your, what are you struggling with your horse? Or what do you want to do with your horse? And then people will say, well, my horse is better on the left rein or better on the right rein. It doesn't really matter. But that doesn't tell me anything, really, because better at what? Better at cantering pirouettes? Or is it better at trotting straight ahead? What is the issue with this particular horse, with this particular rider, at this particular time? And we have to get much, much closer into the problem in order to solve what is really the issue at hand. But we always aim for this. Either you have to, one, move the load from one joint, the problem joint, to another joint. That isn't a problem at the moment. Or you will have to strengthen and make more flexible and train from a very low level the joint that is the problem. And this is a bit tricky. The trick here is that if you take your horse to the vet says, I have to give your horse some anti-inflammatory thingies. Okay, that's fine. And then you solve that inflammation that the horse had, let's say in the right shoulder. But then you take the horse straight back into the same training regime, moving the same way you always have and letting the horse move the same way it always has. That is likely to bring the horse back to the same problem. You see where I'm going? At the same time, if you go to the veterinarian says this shoulder needs to back there, there's an inflammation. Then you must also go to a trainer and say, my horse has an inflammation back there. I've been to the veterinarian. The problem isn't there right now, but I know it's going to come back if I keep training the way I've always trained. And then your trainer must say, but I know how to solve this, or some such. All right? And then your trainer, hopefully, can help you to solve this issue to make you train differently. You will either have to train very carefully, very slowly, that tissue, that shoulder that has the problem. You train that carefully up to a level where it's strong enough to do its job properly, the way you're already riding. Or you move the load to somewhere else. Move it back to the hind legs, for instance. That's a good idea. You can see some of that in our earlier streams if you like. So this is sort of what the main issue here revolves around. You have to move the load from the problem area, or you have to strengthen, make more flexible, make more blood flow through, make the joint, what's it called? Fluids, thank you very much. Move through that joint. Depending on where it is on the body, it might be that there's so little blood flow through the area that the joint fluids are what have to move nutrition into and waste out of that area. That might happen too, but it's all possible to solve. So you have to move it or strengthen it. Very simplified. Right, where have I got to now? I feel like I'm lost.
Then we have to find out.
Do you know where I am?
No.
So I'm home. Good.
Yeah, perhaps you would...
I am right where I need to be.
Yeah. So I think you can start with some examples.
We will start with examples in just a few seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So It might be minutes even, I don't know. We'll see. So we know now that there is an issue somewhere, like your horse has some issue, you have some issue. You have a problem in your body, the horse has a problem in its body. It might be that one exercise or another is an issue for you. You can't do this exercise and you should be able to, because it looks like this other exercise that you already can do is more complicated than the one you can't. So it might be all sorts of little things like that. It doesn't have to be an injury. It might be just a chronic problem, right? So we have now these ideas about how to fix them. You have to take the load away, or you have to reload that area until it is strong enough. In order to do that, get back to the training scales. Try and understand your problem related to the training scale, right? Let's say it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. I can't break down any or every little problem. What I can do is say this. You have to find out whether it is looseness, whether it is strength, whether it is balance, whether it is rhythm. That is your problem. All the things that you find in the training scales, okay? We already have talked a bit about this, and you may ask more about that later on, and we will definitely talk about the training scales more. But this is what you have to do. You have to find a way from the chronic problem you have into the training scales, relate it to the training scale, so that you can understand how the problem has come about. And I will put in another disclaimer now that I feel is appropriate. It doesn't have to be your fault. This is important. You could always say that you could solve the problem. That doesn't mean that you are the cause of the problem. See? This is important. Don't take it all on yourself. That's not the issue here. The issue is, how can we solve it? The past has created something. The future is where you solve this something. And this, you do this, collect information, apply the information, right? This is how we're gonna solve all these problems in the future. Right, I feel like we need to now repeat this, find some questions, put them in there, right? And yet, deadly silent, you guys. What do you want?
I've got some questions.
Please.
Extended trot.
Yes.
Many people say that it's impossible to do more than so and so many extended trot like sessions in a horse's life.
Yeah.
So, does extended trot in itself make strain injuries in a horse?
I can answer both yes and no and be truthful, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I will try and explain this so that it's understandable. All right. The extended trot is a very large trot. It's defined as the hind hoof stepping further forward than the front hoof in the landing. So on the same side, this front hoof leaves a hoof footprint, and in the same stride, or the next stride with this hind leg, it will surpass that footprint. That's an extended trot. Does it cause strain? Does it mean that the horse can only do this many? No. If the horse is strong and flexible enough, it is not a problem. But that means, what I have just stated now also means that the horse needs to carry itself from behind. This is not easy. Most people do not do it. Not even people who think they do this. I can make an example of myself. I've been known to be very good at collecting horses, which is almost true. I've been very good at making the horses bend their haunches and sit down. Doesn't necessarily mean that they are carrying from behind at the same time. I'm telling you the truest things I know, right? So, in the sense that you keep building the strength in your horse, the strength in its tendons, its ligaments, and its muscles, it will never be a problem to do an extended trot. If, however, you drop the horse's back, / the horse drops its own back, and starts landing on its shoulder alone. You can see this quite often in horse magazines when they show extended trot. You will quite often see that the horse has one leg, one front leg, suspended on the ground and no other legs. This trot will definitely hurt the horse over time. Some horses might be able to take it for a long time, even their whole lives. But this horse will have this horse will most likely have an finite amount of strides in it at that particular way of moving before that some structure is broken down. You have to, if you want things to be sustainable, you have to make sure that the musculature is engaged, not only the ligaments and tendons. You also have to do it the other way around. You have to make sure that the ligaments and tendons are activated in the right way so that you can share the load over a larger area. So on one side, yes, you can last forever. On the other side, almost all sports on a very high level for people are not good for the body over a long time. This is where it separates. There are like 3 ideas. Move wrongly, that will lead to a problem. Move correctly, you can keep doing that because that's what correctly means. It's sustainable. And the third thing is, at the extreme maximum of training, we know that people hurt themselves training. In order to become the best skier in the world, your back will be blown. In order to become the best squatter in the world, you will have to exchange your hips when you're 50. This doesn't necessarily happen, but quite often these things happen. So, in my opinion, you can do it correctly, but there are limits to how and what you need to do. Does this answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
No problem.
Have you got some questions? Yeah.
You look like a question mark.
We start with the ones from you.
Yes, please.
Aud Lindholm is asking, my 20-year-old horse has a strong and a weak side. He carries himself pretty good at his right side, but struggle a bit on the left hand. We try to be aware of this during training, but we need to know what more to do. We have been working with what you have said before, but I wonder if there is some more we should do.
Yes. This is a very good question, Ad. But I'll try and I'll be difficult with you. Is that all right? I know you know me, so I'm going to try and be a little bit difficult with you. You say that the horse carries itself well on the right side. It sounds to me like your question also says that this right side where it works pretty well is the strong side. This is almost never the case. Almost never. It can feel like it, but it's almost never the case. All horse racing, on this part of the planet at least, happens in a left bend. That's not because the horse is stronger in the right side. Most horses are what they call in the Spanish riding school hollow on the right side. It is often easier to ride the horses like this and often much easier to shorten them on the right hand side. But it doesn't necessarily mean the horse is stronger in the right hand side. So what I will suggest is this. When you ride to the right, I want you to try and move your inside leg a little bit further back, making sure that you're allowing your hip to move through forward. Okay? A little bit further back. have someone check whether your stirrup is right underneath where your seat bone will be in the saddle. If it is, you're on the right spot. That's number one. Number two, when you're riding on the left rein, make sure to be seated to the left all the way over. Check it. Have a look. Make someone look at the saddle from behind. If the saddle moves over to the outside, make sure to keep your weight in the inside stirrup. Same rule applies. The ball of your feet, or the stirrup if you like, underneath the seat bone. If it is, and you're able to keep your leg flexible, the horse should start to become softer in that side. Also, think about exercises that make the horse push off more with the right hind and make the horse more flexible in the left hind leg. I know this is it's like upside down from what you're asking, but this is the best I think I can do without seeing your horse, okay? So this is what I would suggest, because I know you are a person who thinks, but if you feel like this right hand side is stronger and you have been thinking and using your knowledge and your skill to the best of your ability and it still doesn't solve the problem, I would turn the problem upside down based on the fact that you are already intelligent and know how to do this. And the other thing being, it's almost never that way. See where I'm going with that? Try that. Ask more if you want. I hope it answers your question. More? More?
I've got some,
please, fire
in my pocket. Many riders have pain in their lower back.
Yeah.
It's a very common problem.
Yes.
Can you say something about that?
Yeah. Pain in the lower back. This is a very common problem. It is actually so common that somewhere in the vicinity of 80% of the general population has trouble in their lower back during their lifetime. Does that? I'm just kidding. It's actually true. 80%-ish. Depending on some different things. For instance, up here in the cold north, where everybody is this tall, it's worse. Some other places it isn't as bad. Probably in the Netherlands it's even worse because they are even taller. I don't know. I haven't checked that out properly. However, if you have trouble with pain in your lower back, you can check out these simple things. Is your back mostly this way, or is it mostly this way? Down in the lower back. Now I can't even get this way, so I guess I'm too much this way then. Yeah? So are you sway backed, or do you have a C-shaped curve in your lower back? Most people have a sway back this way. If you do, and you have issues down there, refer to what we were talking about. How can we move the load around in that joint? The joint now being the whole of your lower back. We do this. If this is the problem, then do this. But be careful in the beginning, because these tissues aren't prepared, right? It's very easy when you try to change the way you move. It's very easy to overload the new thing because it instantly doesn't hurt. It's like, oh God, this is great. And then you keep training really hard and then it starts hurting again. And then now you've broken both sides of your spine. That's not the way it actually works. Quite rarely, pain relates to an injury. Quite often, pain relates to your brain asking your brain, is this a problem? And quite often you can say, no. And this isn't even a joke. This is like some of the hardest people on the planet have problems like this. One of the greatest basketball players the world has known, Hakeem Olajuwon was his name, is his name actually. He talked to one of his friends once, and his friend, another basketball player, had also always had trouble with some ligaments and some stuff in his knee. But after a while, Hakim had found out that he had the same thing. He'd had it for 15 years. It feels like a headache in your knee, right? But he had played with it and didn't do anything about it. So he was doing work on a very high level, well, even a very high level, this being basketball. I'm sorry. But anyway, so it is possible to compete at a high level or even perform at a high level, even if you have nagging pains. But nagging pains tend to mean something. It quite often means either something has happened or something will happen. Not always can you find out what. You can't always ask the X-ray machine and get a good answer. But that's anyway how to approach it. You can just toughen up. That's one idea. Right? So toughen up? No. Make sure your back is straight. Make sure the movement isn't through the lower back and or the upper back, but that the movement actually happens at the hip joint. That is perfectly possible when you ride and perfectly preferable. As we have explained in earlier streams, there are reasons why this is more preferable for the horse, and there are also reasons for you. Your spine is very strong if loaded this way. It's not very strong if loaded this way. So this sharing force that happens between two of the spinal processes, no, what do you call them? Spinal segments. There you go. Segments, that's what it's called from now on. If they move like this, that's bad. If they move this way, that's not a problem. Your spine can take a lot of downward force into it. Unless, of course, it's like this. Right? Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Good. More questions? Yes?
Hege Höjby is asking, when the horse suddenly spooks or takes off and I can't see anything that would scare it, what should I look for to find out where the problem lies? I am supposing there are some stiffness somewhere which causes the spooking. Also, any tip how to handle it? Mostly this happens when lunging and the horse looks like it begins to loosen up.
Mm-hmm. Very good question. Number one, when the horse is responsive to the aids, all of the problems disappear. Have a look in Mysle. Right. The last part of your question is the most interesting thing. Just when the horse starts to loosen up, something makes it spook. This is completely normal. Not necessarily fun, but completely normal. It can be fun too. But it is completely normal. The reason? Probably the horse starts then to move tissues that aren't normally moved. And then the horse feels, you can call it discomfort. You can also, if we want to be really, complex about it, I know that Hege likes to think deeply about things, so let me put this one out there for you. Either it is that discomfort thing, or it's this. The horse, if everything is correct, the horse has given all its power to you. I would spook at that. You want to take all my power and command it around? You better be ready. I think that this is one of the main reasons stuff like this happens. That you either ask the horse for more of its power than it is prepared to or willing to give you, or that you have touched on tissue that doesn't normally move in this way that you're asking it to move. So of course, we can go into little minute details about it, but I know that you will be able to understand the bigger picture. So please try and think about it as one of these things. It's no worse than that. Make the horse dip into it, and then tell her that it's not a problem. Just relax, go back to normal, and dip into it a little bit again. This is how you start to increase the horse's ability to be able to tolerate that pressure or that difficulty of moving, and or move into the horse giving all of its power to you, which is what we are aiming for, actually. I think that should solve your problem if you keep moving like that. Thank you.
What about horses that are bucking, especially when you strike into canter?
All right. Quite a lot of horses do this. I know that. I actually think maybe I know people watching who have horses can do that thing. Buck when they strike off into canter. The difference between trot or walk and canter is that in the canter there's much more power going through the lower back of the horse than there is at the trot. Because both the hind legs reaching underneath more or less at the same time and pushing off more or less at the same time, it's not instantly, but more or less. Because of that, the pelvis is pushed very hard underneath if the horse does this correctly. And then the back starts to lift because of that. And if the horse hasn't been used to lifting its back like that, which is quite often the case, just have a look at your own horse in a video and see, does the back normally look like that, or does it normally look like it's moving up and down, or is it just hanging down there? If you can manage to train that in another way, then you will be able to get rid of the problem. You can of course ask for a strike off into canter 10,000 times and the problem will most likely be gone by that time. But maybe you will be gone too, which will be a problem again. So what we're going to try and do is do other exercises that will tend to do that same thing. For instance, back up a bit. Make the horse do that same thing. Another thing that will quite often be a problem here is that you will probably become tense, or you're already tense and they have already like squeezed your knees a little bit and let your butt out behind you, and then you want the horse to lift up through here and it just can't lift up through there, and then tries to just get you out of the saddle a bit so that it can canter properly. It doesn't mean that it's your fault. This is important. Again, it's not necessarily your fault. The horse might be just a kilometer long where it needed to be 900 meters long. Or it might be not rounded through the back, it might just have a sway back. It might be that there's no bend in the knees of the horse. So there are many different ideas that can start solving the problem. And quite often you need all of this. You need the horse to bend at the knee, quite likely. You need the horse to lift the back, quite likely. You need to sit forward in the saddle and let go of your hips. Well, let them loose at least. Not let them go completely, that's not good for you. But it's important that you try and sit on your butt, release your hips, relax your hips, stay straight in your upper back, stay straight in your lower back, and then release the horse through the movement through the back. In my opinion, that should solve most of those problems. Probably not in the first few times you try it. Depending on how long the horse has been in this shape, upside down with its back looking like a hammock, or maybe even the other way, maybe it's stiff the other way. Both of those can happen. Most often it's the hanging back that's the problem. If it's been there for a long time, then it's very likely that all the tissues are prepared for movement the other way. So the horse wants to move this way, like push its back down when it kicks off. And quite often that can lead to a buck too, because it's a finite amount of movement that way. So the horse will say, no, this isn't fun anymore, and you can go off now, please. That happens quite a lot. And what you need to do is make sure that you have actually prepared your horse properly. It's not easy.
What about if it's difficult to sit to the trot?
Walk. Next.
That's easy.
Quite often the trot will be difficult to sit, and this is what I have to say. Number one, make sure you're seated properly. We have told you how to do this several times. Make sure to put your legs on top of the knee pads, scoot your butt forward until you're sure that your seat bones are in the deepest position in the saddle possible. Then, when you take your legs down, you will find that it is almost impossible, most of you, to get the leg down without the pelvis tilting the wrong way again. So you'll have to make sure that this doesn't happen. When it doesn't happen, 3 months from now, that's almost not a joke. When this doesn't happen, when you take your leg back down, try trotting again. If the trot now is possible to sit, well, you have solved the problem. If the trot now isn't possible to sit, then your horse has a shite trot and you have to retrain it. That's a little bit of a joke, but I'm blushing a bit too, so it's a little bit true as well. If that last thing is the case, I would love to take your horse back down to a walk and then work at the walk, sideways at the walk, bending at the walk, both ways obviously, both ways. Ooh. Like bend the horse to the inside on the right rein and to the outside on the right rein, and then bend the horse to the outside on the left rein and to the inside on the left rein, both of those, both 4. Weird numbers here, but do that, and then also work on walk, back up transitions, walk, halt, back up, back to walk, and then after doing that for a while, let's say a few lessons, few weeks, few minutes, depending, you will get a few strides of trot that feel really soft to sit. Those are the strides of trot we have been looking for. Those are the droids we are looking for, those little round gated trots. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
Very good. It's easy to answer your questions because I already know the answers to your question. No more? Good. Yeah?
Nobody is wanting to...
Nobody wants to
No?
chime in? That's fine.
What about stiff shoulders?
Who's?
Pain in the horse?
The horse's stiff shoulders?
Yeah, you know, many horses are running forwards.
Yeah, running away from you, so you have to hold them back.
Yeah,
and stuff
so
like
so they're hard in the mouth and stuff like that.
Oh,
But
yeah.
perhaps it's just because the stiff shoulders.
Now, the first thing I need to say here now is quite often when this is the problem that Hanni is describing, the horse is running away from you, you have to hold the horse in the reins quite hard. Quite a lot of people have this problem. They say, my horse is so strong. This is not true. Your horse is weak and stiff.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, if the horse has a problem in its shoulders, it's never just the shoulders. It is also the thoracic spine. The thoracic spine is the portion of the spine from about here to about here, also in the horse. So withers and around there. Or in other simpler layman's terms, where you are sitting. So we have to go back to that, what is it called again? Half halts. Make sure that you rebalance the rider properly. Make sure that your hips are actually loose. And I'm going to say this, and I'm sure that this is the truth for many. How many times last week did you do something to make your hips more flexible? Just gonna leave it hanging. Do that more and again, please. Just start now. Nobody's shaming you backwards. Start now. Do it from today. You'll be fine tomorrow. Even better the next day. So first, make sure your seat isn't behind the movement. Second, make sure to bend your horse. If the horse is never bent, it will always be down like this or crunched in like that. If you never bend, the horse does never become flexible in this area and never in the shoulder. The shoulders need to be allowed to become flexible. Bending does not mean that you hold on to one rein. It means bend the horse properly. You must find someone who can teach you this. Yes? More questions?
Yeah, it
You have
seems
to come up with loads of questions.
Yeah, it seems that all my questions are about the horse, but you're also answering about what the rider should do, so that's good. I was thinking about when the horse is opening its mouth when you're riding.
Oh, yeah?
It could sometimes it's because the rider pulls, but you can see that the horse is opening its mouth also when the rider does not actually pull at the reins.
Yeah, so both of these happen quite a lot. Quite often, if the rider holds on to the rein too much, and this might happen in many different ways. It might be that you're holding too much to one side. It might be that you're pulling both hands back. It might be that your arms are moving as opposed to your body. Or it might be that your body moves but your arms are staying still. Or it might be that your arms move but your body stays still. And both of those are wrong. All of these are wrong. And they will leave your hands hanging in the horse's mouth to some degree. It might be 3 grams and not be a problem for the horse as such, but it means that your hand is moving some differently than your seat bones, which isn't correct. That might be the problem that makes the horse open its mouth. Just as often, though, you will find that this problem doesn't lie directly in the rider's hand. Quite often it lies in the rider's seat. My seat has been strong and stiff, and it makes my horses quite often open their mouths. This happens because when the horse becomes stiff in the back and is also trying to keep a proper outline through its neck, the jaw is able to take out some of the slack that the thoracic spine should have been able to, but isn't because of the lack of movement in the rider's hips. This is kind of as simplified as I can make that answer, I think. And we come back to the same thing again. Make sure you're seated correctly. Make sure you're seated correctly, always.
But sometimes the horse is stiff somewhere in the neck or the shoulders.
Yes. What's the English expression for stilling?
Positioning.
Positioning of the head.
Positioning of the head.
All right. So quite often we can get the horse to do some sort of bend through some part of the spine, but then the head will be stuck in some position. So no matter what happens to the rest, the head is stuck to the first 2 vertebrae in some position. That might happen in this plane, or it might happen in this plane. Both of those need to be flexible in order to accommodate as much movement through the spine as the horse needs.
And this is really important.
It is very important. It is actually so important that some books about riding are based on first making sure that the jaw is flexible. It doesn't mean that the jawbone is flexible. It means that the horse isn't tense in its jaw. And second, that the skull moves on the first and second vertebrae before you do anything else. And this is, it solves so many problems that it is very important to take it up right now. It is the same thing you can find with some chiropractors insist on doing only a small adjustment between the skull and the first vertebrae. And when that is correct, they say that the rest of the body will align itself underneath there. I'm not sure if that's true. I have never tested it, so I couldn't answer either negative or positive. But we do see evidence that there's quite a lot happening if you can manage to get the positioning of the head correctly. Be very, very gentle with your fingers and you might get it. Yeah. Even more questions? Oh, you have questions. Brilliant. Let's hear it.
Hege Höjby again. New question. The osteopath said my youngest horse is stiff in the lower part of the neck. Any tip on loosening that part?
Yeah. Bend the horse properly.
With the proper positioning.
Positioning of the top. So that means first you have to make sure that the horse isn't stuck there between the skull and the first two vertebrae. Mm-hmm. And that you do with a very soft, gentle hand first. Okay? Then make sure the horse bends all the way through the neck and then move, preferably even sideways, to make sure the horse moves like this first. And then make sure that it can move in that plane as well. If all of that will work, the very lower part of the neck will come up. Also, you need to sit further forward in the saddle. Ref what I just said. Yeah, you had two? No. You that was what you said. Yeah, okay, fine. I think that's the...
Got a question.
Yes?
When the rider is afraid, that is a problem?
For the rider, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, but how do we solve that problem?
To solve the problem of fear.
Yeah.
I'll do that right now. I won't do that right now, but I will do my very best. Okay. So the first thing I do, if the rider has any sort of fear, this might be that you have already accepted that you're afraid in some way. It might be that you have not yet accepted it, and your body betrays you when we watch it riding. All of these things are quite fine. What we do is first, I accept that you are in some way afraid of what's going on. This might be many, many different aspects of your soul or body. Sometimes opening the hips might be a massive problem for some people. This might be a problem for some females for obvious reasons that I won't get further into, or even for some males for some fairly similar reasons, but not quite exactly the same. But like I have told you guys before, the first time I managed to relax properly through my seat, I blushed. So I find it fairly difficult to relax properly. So what I do if you're afraid is first, don't get on the horse if you're afraid. That's number one. Just give me a second. Just turning off the kids. So what you need to do is first accept that you're afraid of something. It might be that you're afraid of violent movement. It might be that you're afraid of relaxing your hips. It might be that you're afraid of being carried by another being, which is a weird thing to be doing anyway. There's all sorts of different ideas of why you're afraid, but the first thing is you need to accept it, and you need to accept the consequences. So get off the horses if that's what you need to do. Get someone beside you if that's what you need to do. Don't get out of the walk if that's what you need to do. Don't accept that my horse is so full of energy today. That's not ever true. Ever. I have never ever experienced that my horse has too much energy. Never. Not once. I have experienced that my horse was stiff and horrible to ride, but not because of too much energy. If you feel like the horse has too much energy, the horse is stiff or the horse is tense. And if you put a tense rider upon a tense horse, you're in trouble. Don't do it. Get off, or make sure that at least one of you can release some of the tension somehow. I would then stay at the walk. I would also then make sure the seat is as good as I can make it. I will then start to bend the horse to one side. Two reasons. First, if you bend the horse to one side, you decrease the energy in the horse. Number two, the energy tends then to go in a direction that is easier for you to anticipate. 2 good reasons to bend the horse if you're afraid. So if you're not afraid, don't adhere to this, but if you are, do this. Start there. And then as the horse becomes more flexible and more relaxed and more balanced, you will feel that the fear will decrease because you have more control, and your body will recognize this control, and it will allow you to turn down a little bit on the fear. However, some of us live on that edge of fear. We kind of thrive out there. We hear that? We kind of thrive out there. So what I tend to do is to push the energy as far as I possibly can and ride on the edge of that as much as I can. Sometimes I do that by jousting. Sometimes I do that when my horse is telling me in no uncertain terms that this is too much energy for right now, and I will just have to say, okay, I get that, I will not ask for that much right now. But this is how I will deal with fear first and foremost. Accept it. Don't fight it. Don't push it down. Accept it first. Permit it to pass over you and through you.
Yeah, good. And also, I think there is one more thing, that many people aren't that, they're sort of after the movement, or they're letting the horse do things, and then they become afraid of what the horse has already done.
Yes.
That is also, I feel, a reason that people feel that they lose control because they can't anticipate what the horse is going to do.
Yeah, it's important. We can relate it to a thing that most people have learned or heard, at least. You should follow the horse's movement. And it is so easy then to become behind the horse's movement, because it kind of, if you follow it, that's sort of what you should do, right? You'd be behind the movement, or you can't follow it. You can't follow it if you're in front, right? So if you have understood that you should be behind the movement, be following the movement, then it is by definition the horse that's leading the movement, and therefore you will become more afraid, because it's very difficult to be in charge and behind the movement while the horse is in charge at the same time. I think that's actually impossible. It is impossible. It was sort of a joke, not a good one. Yeah. Prøv. Kjør.
How do I know that I have gotten to the right tact and rhythm for my horse? Or how do we get to the right tact and rhythm for the horse?
Stupendously advanced question. That is extremely difficult to answer. Thank you, Mia.
It's actually a question of experience, because I can, when I see a horse, I can right away see if it hasn't got its own rhythm, because but it's like, it's something like, because the size of the horse, how long limbs the horse has got, you can sort of feel that this horse is too short for his own body, and the step is too short for the size of the volume, the mass of the horse, because this is physics. So it's something that you really must train yourself to see. But I guess perhaps Pelle has got some good advice as well.
Some data points.
Because he's a data guy.
Number 1, does it start with a hind leg? Does it start with the one you're asking for? That's number 1. I know that your question is about something further on, right? But does it? Always. That's number 1. It doesn't always, but ask for it as often as you can. Number 2, it needs to feel as if the length of the leg swinging swings true. You can see there, when I try to swing my arm as far back as it goes forward, it stops too soon when going back, and it swings further forward.
Just like a pendulum.
Because this pendulum is stopped by the stiffness in my shoulder, so it doesn't swing back as freely as it swings forward. That means that I can only be in the correct rhythm if I stay within this quite short stride, which is correct if it is fitting with the speed. You see the idea? So that's not an impossibility to feel. Another thing is, does it feel comfortable? If there's a bit of if it feels a little bit like this underneath your seat, it's probably not very good. If it feels very soft, as if your butt is never leaving the saddle, then it is probably right. Doesn't matter how long or how short the stride is. If that happens, it is good. Right? So this whole correct tucked and rhythm, it is important that there are physical limits to how fast you can move a limb without it becoming stiff. I can move it further, but it isn't the correct rhythm, and it isn't difficult to see, and it is no more difficult to feel. But you have to accept that this is the problem, or this is what we're aiming for. So probably a shorter stride in the beginning is easier, strangely, because collection is difficult, but a short stride doesn't equal collection, therefore it can be quite easy. A bigger stride, like if the hind hoof hits the track from the front hoof, that's a medium trot. That's already a big trot, and you'll feel it, but it can still be very soft. If it isn't soft, it isn't correct in its rhythm, because it means that the rhythm of the pendulum is broken by some sort of tension in musculature somewhere in the body. And to answer every little piece can't of course be done, but you'll feel and understand that. So if there's any discomfort in your riding, it isn't correct in the rhythm.
And also there are different signs that you can look for. For instance, that the nose is in front of the vertical, that the hind cannon is parallel with the lower arm. Is that, yeah? The diagonal legs, those need to be parallel in the trot.
Hit the ground at the same time.
Yes, and
the
also
My horse found his mute button.
So if the horse is quiet when it's trotting or cantering, if you can't hear it, either you've gone deaf, you're cantering in the snow, or the horse has become silent because it lands silently. That is quiet most often, almost always, a sign that the rhythm is very good. So find the mute button. That's a good one. Good question. Thank you.
And then I've got another question
Awesome.
that is sort of a follow up on that.
On this?
Yeah, because show jumpers. You say there is a saying that you when a show jumping horse can jump high obstacles just once a week or perhaps twice a week, and that's a good thing, because it is really a big strain on the front legs, especially on the shoulders. But as when a show jumper has sort of got a strain injury in his front legs, it doesn't need to be because of the jumping, because the rest of the other days when the horse is training normally without jumping, if it's training the same leg every time it moves, it never gets to rest that leg.
This is an important point. I'm happy now to be able to quote, paraphrase at least. a trainer at one of the strongest gyms in the world. The gym is called Westside Barbell, and this guy is called Louis Simmons. Don't look him up. He's weird. But he's also a very experienced trainer. And he says, quite often, powerlifters, they do deadlifts, lifting things from the ground. They do squats, lifting things on their back. And bench press, lifting things forward with their arms. They do these 3 things. And quite often, they have troublesome shoulders. And the doctor will always say it's because of the bench press. But Louis Simmons says it's not the bench press, it's the squats, if you're even heavy squatting. I think this relates to the question about the jumping horses. It's very easy to see that high strain when the horse lands on its front legs after jumping. Let's say the horse jumps 40 times a week, or even 100, and it jumps a meter every time. How many canter strides or trot strides do you do over the rest of the week? Thousands? Tens of thousands? How does that strain the body? That's much harder to see because it doesn't look like there's a big strain. But if it's always the same strain and it always attacks the same spot, it'll become a problem. The problem with squatting heavy is that it's very difficult for big heavy guys with big shoulders that bench press a lot to get their shoulders in the correct position when squatting. So they will be squatting with their shoulders forward and their shoulder blades in the wrong position, and then you put a whole lot of strain, a whole lot of weight on that in that weird position, and then your rotator cuff muscles will give out. The same thing happens to the horse. It doesn't necessarily relate to the jumping, even though the horse might stop jumping because of the pain that comes from something else. So quite often, improving the quality of your riding in the other lessons will help solve the problem with the jumping. That's a possibility that we see quite often. I think that answers your question fairly well.
And I've got another one. Oh, it's time.
We still have time for a question.
One more question. You know, hard hands and a rider with painful shoulders.
Hard hands and painful shoulders? Yeah, start moving your hips now.
It's always the answer,
it's
isn't it?
Always the answer. No, have a look at this. If my hips seated on the horse move like this and my arms move like this, I am now pulling at the horse's mouth if the reins aren't hanging slack. And the horse will return the favor by hanging on your hand. And if you're moving like this, you're moving quite often through the lower back, or almost always actually, through the lower back, moving like this. If you move like that through the lower back, it is quite likely that your head stays in front like this, and then your thoracic spine is curled as the lower back is curled. And we said earlier that if there's a problem in the shoulder, there's also a problem in the thoracic spine.
Stop it.
Right? So you need to not do what I just did. Stop it. And instead, make sure to get your butt to the right position. Make sure your lower back stays straight, your abs are on, and keep your shoulders and your head in the correct position. Now, if your arm stays here and moves with your hips, you're not pulling at the horse's mouth. The horse might be pulling at your hand still, but not because you're pulling, because the horse is pulling. That might be because your reins are too short, or it might be because your hips are still too stiff, or 1,000 other ideas. But the principle is that your arm can't move other than what the seat bone moves if you want to do it correctly. Especially the outside rein needs to stay like that. The inside rein has a little more play. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Nice. All right, I've been told it's time. Time for bubbles, I guess. So thank you guys so much for attending us. Please drown us in much more questions. We like to answer them. Suggest ideas for what you want answered for the next stream. Thank you guys.